What would you do if the world you fought for turned its back on you? James Carver sat in the courtroom, his hands clasped tightly, knuckles white against the worn oak table. The air was thick with judgment, the kind that seeps into your bones and makes you question your own truth. He was a man of 48, his face etched with lines from battles fought in deserts far from home, his eyes carrying the weight of memories no one in this room could fathom. The prosecutor's voice sliced through the silence, accusing him of theft, fraud, and most damningly dishonoring the very uniform he'd once worn with pride. The charges were brutal, each word a blade aimed at his heart. The courtroom buzzed with whispers. Reporters scribbled furiously, their pens scratching like vultures picking at a carcass. James had been a decorated veteran, a hero once celebrated for his courage in Afghanistan. But now, the small town of Eldridge saw him differently. To them, he was a fallen idol, a man who'd allegedly stolen from a local veterans charity, siphoning funds meant for his brothers in arms. The evidence was damning. Bank records, forged signatures, and a trail of transactions leading straight to him. He could feel the eyes of the jury boring into him, their faces a mix of pity and contempt. The prosecutor, a sharp young man named Harris, paced like a predator, his voice rising as he painted James as a traitor. This man, Harris declared, pointing, abused the trust of those who served, those who bled, those who died. The words stung, but James remained still, his jaw set, his gaze fixed on a point beyond the room. His lawyer, Emily Voss, leaned close. You have to speak, James. Tell them your side. But he shook his head, his silence a wall no one could breach. Emily was fierce, her belief in him unshakable, but even she didn't know the full story. No one did. Not yet. The trial dragged on for days, each witness adding weight to the accusations. A former comrade testified that James had changed after the war, become distant, secretive. A bank teller swore she'd seen him deposit the stolen funds. The charity's director wept, claiming James had betrayed their cause. The courtroom was a theater of condemnation, and James was its villain. But there was something about James's silence that unnerved the room. It wasn't the silence of guilt. It was something heavier, something deliberate. On the final day, when the prosecution rested, Emily stood and called James to the stand. The crowd leaned forward, expectant, hungry for his confession or his collapse. He rose slowly, his limp barely noticeable, a remnant of a roadside bomb that had claimed 2 of his squad. He took the oath, his voice steady but low, and sat. Emily's questions were gentle, probing, but it was James who took control. I didn't steal that money, he said, his words cutting through the murmurs. But I did take it. The courtroom froze. Harris smirked, sensing victory. But James continued, his voice gaining strength, each word a step towards something inevitable. I took it to save someone. He paused, his eyes sweeping the room, meeting the jury's gaze. Someone you'd all written off. He spoke of a young veteran, Marcus Tate, barely 22, who'd returned from war broken in ways no one could see. Marcus had been homeless, addicted, forgotten by the system meant to protect him. The charity's funds, James explained, were tied up in bureaucracy, inaccessible to those who needed them most. So James had acted. He'd funneled the money to pay for Marcus's rehab, his housing, his chance at a new life. I forged the signatures, James admitted. I broke the rules. But I'd do it again. Because Marcus is alive today. He's working, he's sober, he's rebuilding. That's what the money was for, not for me, but for him. The room was silent, the weight of his words sinking in. Emily produced documents, receipts, rehab records, a letter from Marcus himself, now thriving in a new city. The jury's faces softened, some with tears. Harris objected, his voice faltering, but the judge allowed it. James's truth was no longer just his. It was undeniable. When the verdict came not guilty, the courtroom erupted. Reporters scrambled. The judge banged her gavel. But James simply stood and walked out, his head high. Outside, Marcus waited, his eyes bright with gratitude. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. James Carver had faced a world that branded him a traitor, but in his silence, he'd carried a truth too big for accusations to bury. Sometimes, the greatest battles are fought not with guns, but with choices made in the quiet of a wounded heart. And in that courtroom, James had won.